Hey everyone, my name is Reed, and I do not usually post online like this, but I need to get this out of my system. Something strange has been happening in my apartment, and I think it all started a little over 2 months ago when I picked up something on the street. At first, I thought it was nothing, just a weird object left behind, but now I am not so sure. I am scared, and I need someone to tell me I am not going insane. It was a Thursday evening. Classes had ended late, and I decided to take my usual shortcut home. The sun had already dipped behind the buildings, leaving everything in that in-between state of shadows where streetlights have not fully clicked on yet. On the cracked pavement near the end of the alley, I noticed a shape, a small round lump sitting right in the middle of the path. It was about the size of a softball, dark and glossy, and I thought maybe it was a piece of tech junk or some discarded gadget. When I nudged it with my shoe, I nearly jumped out of my skin. The thing vibrated beneath my foot, not like it rolled or twitched away, but like a phone on silent mode, buzzing in short, steady pulses. I bent down, half afraid it was going to explode, but it did not smell like electronics or wires. It felt faintly warm to the touch, like a stone left under the sun, even though the air was already getting cold. I picked it up. I know it was stupid, like the first mistake in every horror movie ever, but something in me was curious. It did not feel alive, not exactly, but it was not normal either. I carried it the rest of the way home, trying to convince myself it was just some weird art project or science experiment someone had dropped. When I got back, I put it in the spare bedroom. My apartment has 2 bedrooms, one for me and the other that I use as storage. I set the lump down on the floor, shut the door, and went about my night. At first, nothing happened. The next morning, it was still in the same spot, just sitting there like a dead object. I forgot about it for a while. A few days later, though, I noticed something strange. The thing would occasionally vibrate. Not constantly, but at random times, sometimes for a few seconds, sometimes for nearly an hour. I started writing down the times in a notebook, almost like a science experiment. It felt like it was trying to establish some sort of rhythm, though I could not understand what it meant. Whenever I touched it with my hand, the vibrations stopped immediately. By the second week, I was unsettled, but not alarmed. I thought maybe it was some kind of strange machine, maybe even a prank or performance art, but no one online had any clue what it could be when I described it. A friend came over to hang out, and he swore he could hear a faint humming through the wall of the spare room. I laughed it off, but inside, I was nervous. The object was not just a thing anymore. It was acting with intention. Then, around the end of the 4th week, I realized it was no longer the same size. When I had first picked it up, it was small enough to hold in one hand. Now, it had swollen, stretched, changed. It was the size of a medium dog, maybe like a Labrador. The glossy shell had split in several places, revealing pale, fleshy insides that looked disturbingly organic. I could see parts of it wriggling on its own, twitching like muscle under skin. That was the first time it hit the door. The sound was so loud that it rattled the frame and jolted me awake in the middle of the night. I ran to the spare room and pressed my ear against the door. Inside, I could hear it dragging itself around, scraping against the floorboards, throwing itself against the wall. I backed away and did not go back in. I told myself I would call someone in the morning, maybe the landlord or even animal control. But when morning came, I convinced myself it was just a one-time thing. I tried to ignore it. I buried myself in classes, homework, part-time work, anything to keep me from thinking about what was in that room. But each night, I heard it again. Sometimes it threw itself at the door. Sometimes it just shuffled. What bothered me most was the pauses. It would go silent for hours, and I knew it was waiting, listening, aware of me on the other side. By the 6th week, something even worse happened. I was on a call with my girlfriend, laughing about something dumb, when I froze. Through the thin apartment walls, I heard my own laugh echo back at me from the spare room. My voice, but distorted. My laugh, but stretched out and broken, like someone had heard me and was practicing the sound. I hung up the call and sat there in silence, barely breathing. From that point, I knew it was not just a lump of flesh. It was learning. It was paying attention. Every day I considered dragging it out of my apartment, but every day I stopped myself. Part of it was fear. Part of it was curiosity. I wanted to know what it was, what it wanted, how far it could go. But I also hated myself for letting it stay. The banging eventually stopped. That almost made it worse. Now, instead of trying to escape, it waited. Sometimes, late at night, I would hear faint noises through the wall, soft crying. It sounded like a child, or maybe like someone who had been left alone for too long. The first time it happened, I nearly opened the door, but something deep in my gut told me not to. There were moments when I stood in front of that door with my hand on the knob, frozen between fear and pity. It was like it knew how to manipulate me, how to reach the weak part of me that wanted to believe it was harmless. That is where I am now. I can hear it as I type this. Small whimpers, quiet sobs. It does not sound like a monster. It sounds like a person who is suffering. But I know better. I know it is not human. And I am terrified of what will happen if I let it out. I will update again if anything changes. Please, if anyone has ever experienced something like this, tell me what to do. I am not sure how much longer I can keep it locked away. Hey everyone, read again. I told myself I would only post again if something major happened, and now I wish I had kept quiet. Things are far worse than before. I cannot keep this to myself anymore. The crying from the spare room has not stopped. It comes every night, sometimes so soft it sounds like it is just on the edge of my hearing. Sometimes so loud it is like someone is pressed against the wall, sobbing into the plaster. I do not sleep much anymore. I sit up in bed with my heart pounding, waiting for the sound to fade, but it never fully does. I almost believe it is crying for me, like it knows that pity is the only weapon it needs to get me to open the door. Last week, I was making coffee in the kitchen when I heard a whisper. At first, I thought it was just a neighbor in the hall, but when I turned, I realized it was coming from behind the locked door. It was my name, clear and distinct. Read, over and over. My knees nearly buckled under me. It had never spoken before, not like that. I pushed a chair under the knob after that, not trusting the flimsy lock anymore. I sat there shaking, trying to think rationally, but the longer I listened, the more I realized it was not just repeating my name. It was asking, begging. It said, please. It sounded wrong, slurred, like a mouth that had never formed words before, but the meaning was there. It knew who I was. It wanted me to let it out. I avoided the room as much as I could, but I could feel its presence even through the walls. My girlfriend called one night, and while I was talking to her, I heard it again, this time in perfect imitation of her voice. The exact tone, the exact pitch. From inside the room, it called me babe, just like she does. My girlfriend was still on the phone, confused why I suddenly went silent, but the voice on the other side of the wall kept repeating it. That was when I knew it had been listening all along. Every phone call, every conversation, every laugh with friends, it had been gathering, copying, storing. I thought about calling the police, but I stopped myself. What would I even say? That I had been keeping a growing creature locked in a room for weeks? That my apartment was haunted by something that could mimic voices? They would call me insane, or worse, they would investigate, and the landlord would kick me out. I cannot afford another place. I am a broke student barely scraping by as it is. So I stayed quiet, and I tried to endure. But then it grew again. It is hard to explain what it looks like now, because every time I peek through the crack of the door, I see something different. At times, it looks like a mass of pale muscle stretched across the floor, writhing in slow motion. At other times, it rears up like it is trying to imitate a human silhouette, limbs half-formed and twisting. The only thing that remains the same is its size. It is as large as a grown man now, maybe larger, and every day the air in that room gets thicker with a coppery, almost bloody smell. Then, 2 nights ago, everything changed. I came home late from class, exhausted, and when I went to the spare room, the door was open. The chair was knocked aside. I froze in the hall, every nerve in my body screaming to turn and run, but I forced myself to look. Inside was not my spare room anymore. The walls and ceiling were coated with some kind of growth, fleshy and veined, pulsing faintly as though alive. The floor was slick, covered in a film of reddish moisture, and the air was so heavy, I gagged. There were vines or roots or tendrils, whatever you want to call them, crawling out from the walls like veins spreading through a body. My apartment was no longer an apartment. It was turning into something else. And the thing was gone. I do not know how long it had been free. I do not know where it went. I backed out of the hall, shaking, and locked myself in my bedroom until morning. The entire night I heard faint scratches on the walls, sometimes near, sometimes far. At one point, something brushed the outside of my bedroom door, slow and deliberate, like it wanted me to know it was still there. The next morning, I packed what I could and left. I drove to a friend's place 2 towns over and have been crashing on his couch since. I thought maybe, just maybe, I was free of it. But I was wrong. Last night, at around 3 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of scratching at the window. At first I thought it was just tree branches, but then I heard a voice. My girlfriend's voice, clear as day. It whispered, "Read, please, let me in." I sat frozen in the dark, staring at the curtains, my heart hammering. I grabbed my phone and called her. She answered groggy and confused, still in her own apartment more than an hour away. While I listened to her voice through the phone, the same voice was outside my window, begging me to open it. I hung up and pulled the curtains shut tighter. The scratching continued for another hour before finally fading. I have not slept since. So here is my warning to all of you. That thing is not gone. It is out there now, wandering, learning, looking for someone to fool. If you live anywhere near me, or even if you do not, you need to pay attention. If you hear crying outside your window at night, do not look. If you hear someone calling your name in a familiar voice, do not respond. If you see something that looks almost human, but not quite, stay away. It is not a person, no matter how much it sounds like one. It is not me. It is not your friend. It is not your loved one. It will try to trick you, and it will try to get inside. I made the mistake of bringing it home once, and now it is loose. And it is hungry. Final warning. If you hear your name tonight, if you hear crying outside your door, if you hear someone you know asking to be let in, do not open it, because it is waiting. Thank you for tuning in. Please leave a like and subscribe. We'll see you again next week.